What's up guys, my name's Liam and today we're going to be talking about the Pulsar X2, the Random Frank P edition. Is this mouse going to be worth upgrading over the original versions? Let's check it out. Alright guys, and here we got the X2. This is actually the medium size in the Random Frank P edition, and this mouse looks phenomenal. And just a quick disclaimer for you guys, I actually was also going to pick up the Boardsy edition, the small version of the mouse. Unfortunately, when I went to pick this mouse up on Lethal Gaming Gear, I kind of was slow with it because I didn't think it was going to sell out as quickly as it did. And the mice actually sold out much quicker than I had anticipated. So I apologize I wasn't quicker with it. I didn't realize they were going to go so fast. However, with that being said, here we got the Random Frank P edition, and these mice are supposed to have the similar specs. So not supposed to be any differences other than the fact of the colorway and how they look. I think that this mouse looks absolutely incredible. This green color kind of pops a bit more in person as opposed as it does in the pictures. And when I did open up the box, I would say I was pretty surprised and shocked at how cool this mouse actually looks, especially once you get on the desk there. It definitely adds a nice aesthetic to your desktop. If you are looking at a more in-depth comparison between the medium size and the mini size, I'll put a link down in the description for that video so you guys can also go watch that and check that out. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the Bruce Lee edition of the X2, and I'm going to compare these side by side to give you guys an overall view on what differences have been made and how the mouse overall feels compared to the Bruce Lee edition, kind of comparing the two. So starting out with the coating on both of these mice, from what I understand, the coating is supposed to be the exact same on the Bruce Lee edition as opposed to the Random Frank P and the Boardsy editions. However, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just a fluke, I don't know if it's the way that this was painted, I don't know if I got a little bit more coating on my mouse, but for whatever reason, the Random Frank P edition definitely feels a little bit more grippy than the Bruce Lee edition. And the fact is that I don't have a whole lot of use on this mouse. I did actually test this mouse out a lot over the weekend. So in all honesty, I kind of have about the same use time on both of these. So same coating, but again, for whatever reason, I feel like my Random Frank P edition is just a little bit grippier. So when it comes to the weight of these two mice, let's go ahead and drop them on the scale and see how they compare. And looks like we're getting a solid 59.2 grams with X2 Bruce Lee edition. And as you can see there with the Random Frank P edition, additional 0.2 extra grams. So as you can tell, they pretty much line up there on the specs. I don't know where the 0.2 grams it comes from. Maybe they add a little extra coating to my version of the mouse. It could be the rubber on the scroll wheel is a little different, but aside from that, I'm not too sure. So one thing that I've been able to confirm about the Random Frank P edition is this mouse was actually delayed in production. What they actually did is they kind of reworked the mold on creating this mouse due to the issues that the original version of the X2 is having with people having double clicks. I have not been able to confirm whether the Bruce Lee edition has used that new mold or not, but to be completely honest with you, I don't really notice a huge difference as far as the overall performance in these two mice. So probably the biggest noticeable difference between these two mice is that the Bruce Lee edition actually uses their optical switches, whereas the Random Frank P edition and the Boardsy edition are using the Huano Blue Shell pink dots. And for those of you that watch my channel know that the Huano Blue Shell pink dots are actually my favorite switches. So let's go ahead and do a click test on both of these mice, and we'll come back with the results afterwards. Okay, so when comparing these mice side by side, there's actually three differences that I noticed, and let's go and talk about them. So the first difference is very clearly the clicks. I feel like the click weight on both of these mice are actually very similar, and honestly, before I started recording this video, I tried to make sure I was testing them in the exact same spot on the switch to try and get as accurate results as I could. Honestly, they kind of came up with the same results. So I do feel like these switches in terms of performance and weight, they feel almost identical. The biggest differences between the two is I do feel like the clicks on the Bruce Lee edition, they do feel great. They feel amazing. Honestly, these are some of the most amazing switches that I've ever used, especially when it comes to optical switches. I've been a huge fan of these optical switches and I've loved them ever since I first got this mouse. They don't feel as defined or as clicky as the Huano Blue Shell pink dot switches. These honestly just feel just a little bit clickier, a little bit tighter. There's a little bit more of a tone, like a higher pitched tone that goes with it. I would say a slight edge just goes in the feeling of the Huano blue shell pink dots. But again, it's very close. Both these switches are great. A lot of people held this mouse for having optical switches. And I think it's great that they did bring that feature into this mouse, but the only unfortunate thing with it is if I were to use optical switches, I would hope that you get some type of performance benefit. The one issue with having the optical switches in this example is that the tests show that the optical switches don't have any type of performance benefit between these two mice. So I did think that was really unfortunate. Obviously, if you did get a performance advantage over having the optical switches in the Bruce Lee, then I would absolutely say that these would win hand down. But considering the fact that these both have the exact same latency and performance, just a slight edge in my opinion goes to the Huano blue shell pink dot switches. So the second change that I've noticed between these two mice was the scroll wheel. So when you're actually actuating the scroll wheel in the Bruce Lee edition, it feels like the steps are a little bit more defined. The scroll wheel on the Random Frank P edition is just slightly a little bit harder, and the steps seem like they're a little more silenced, like they're not as defined or as loud. So the Bruce Lee edition definitely feels a little lighter and easier to spam over this one. Another big thing I noticed with the scroll wheel is when you click down on the actual middle button. I feel like the middle mouse button on the Bruce Lee edition is much easier to spam. And I feel like the scroll wheel on the Random Frank P edition is just a little tighter and a little harder to spam. It's not a huge difference. You can still spam both of them, but overall I just feel like the scroll on the Bruce Lee edition does feel a little lighter. It is a known fact that both of these mice use a TTC Gold encoder. I do know that they changed the encoder on the Random Frank P edition. This version does actually have a dust-proof encoder on it, as opposed to the older ones that don't have the dust-proof encoder. Now, I was not able to confirm that the Bruce Lee edition did have the dust-free encoder on it or not. Based on my results and how they feel, I would guess and assume that it didn't, or it could be something with the build quality. So when it comes to comparing this mouse to the original version, let's go ahead and do a sound check and test out the switches. When it comes to comparing the newer Random Frank P version to the original version, I do feel like these clicks do feel slightly lighter than the Kel 8.0s, and I do overall feel like the implementation feels a bit better. Over time, these switches have loosened up, and there's sometimes where I spam the switch, I hear kind of like a squeaky sound in there, something like that. I don't know if that's like plastic rubbing up against the shell somewhere or something like that. With the overall additional coating on here and the click feeling on this mouse, I would say that it definitely does feel like an upgrade over the original version. And again, the comparison between these two is pretty similar when I compare this to the Bruce Lee edition. When it comes to the scroll wheel, I do feel like the scroll wheel on this one is just a little bit clickier than this one. This one definitely does feel harder to click, and it doesn't feel easily as spammable. When it comes to my recommendation between these two sizes, if you're purely a fingertip grip player, I would absolutely say to pick up the X2 Mini. This is one of the best mice on the market for purely fingertip at this size. And when it comes to a claw or relaxed claw grip, if you do have smaller hands, you can still use this mouse. My hands are 10.5 centimeters in width. So with my size of a hand, it does make it a little bit more uncomfortable to claw or relax claw this. It does feel a little bit too narrow for me. Whereas I can fingertip the X2 Medium, it feels much more comfortable for relaxed claw grip. And one last thing I'd like to mention about the Random Frank P edition is I still notice the same thing with the buttons on this mouse. It does still kind of have the teetering left to right on the mouse switches, and it does have a little bit of play left and right as well. And the same issue still kind of applies with having slightly a little bit of pre-travel and having the post-travel. It'll definitely smack into the shell of the mouse. And one last thing I'd like to throw in there when it comes down to purchasing the difference between these two versions. Some of you might be confused as to why the Bruce Lee edition comes in at $119, whereas the Boardsy and Random Frank P edition are coming at $94.95. And just so you guys know, the only difference in the pricing between these two versions is due to the fact that the Bruce Lee edition does come with glass skates. So included in the box with the Bruce Lee edition, it comes with these glass skates, and it comes with an extra set of PTFE feet as well. Whereas the Random Frank P edition does not come with any type of additional skates. All right, guys, so that's my final thoughts on the Pulsar X2 in medium, the Random Frank P edition. So if these are something that you're interested in picking up, I would definitely give them a recommend. If you love this mouse, but you're having the issues with it, I would recommend upgrading. However, if you do have one of the original versions of the mouse and the build quality on it is fine for you, is it worth upgrading? I would probably suggest that you just wait and see what the future entails with them coming out with the 4K versions and stuff like that. Again, I've done many shape comparisons comparing these mice, both the medium and mini version, to other offerings out there on the market in my previous videos. So if you feel like there's any comparisons out there that you'd like to see that I haven't already touched upon, or you'd be interested in finding out, please let me know down in the comments below. And aside from that, if you're looking forward to seeing more videos like this in the future, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon.